Okay. Thank you. This meeting is being recorded. Okay. Right, let's try this again. I'm so sorry about the faffing about there, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I hope you can all hear me and see me. We're being recorded, which is lovely. So anyway, what I was talking about was the ink pen and its reaction with water. And of course, if you're busy here, you know, just put some nice colour down onto your page, and then you get the pen and you draw into that, you'll find very interesting effects that can happen. It's not actually making any difference. It's drawing straight through it, which is fascinating. So I think it's going to do that. But that stays soluble. So you get this nice hybrid mark. It's not really a watercolour. It's not really a pen mark. It's very nice to look at, though. You can see that that's quite interesting. Right, so there we go. I will leave you to make that choice. So I'm just going to use a very boring, ordinary pencil here. I have got a 4B, which is lucky. And I'll just talk you through composition elements. So, and I'm going to try and imagine I'm sitting there on a stony beach, getting cold, because it helps me to get in the zone, I think that. And so coffee helps as well. Right. We have a horizon. And because it's water, that horizon is quite important. So I'm just indicating here where that horizon is, and I'm going to track that along here in very, very pale tones, just so that I know roughly where my horizon is. Now, what's interesting is the horizon, of course, is below the height of the houses. So it's very important to remember this. You know, when you're on, when your eye line, your eye level is where the horizon is. It means that I'm sitting down a height of approximately this wall. So that I must have been sitting on the wall here, as opposed to sitting on the beach, which is fascinating to think, isn't it? Because you can see that horizon in the distance there is up at the height of this wall. So obviously, you know, any perspective lines are going to fade towards that mark. Now, what we've got here is this inlet. So I want to make this pretty clear and strong. I'm just going to put in these rough marks as to where the water actually exists. Now, this little gap is actually very small. And as you can see, this feature, this harbour wall, is just ever so slightly above the horizon line. And I'm just going to mark that in these very simple marks, like this. And we must be very careful with the marks you make here. You can see this so easily when you're sitting there, and it's not easy to see when you've got a silhouette like this. I'm going to have to bring this to you again. So this big black shape here is only half above the water. You can see a boat there floating in what appears to be mid-air. That's because we're looking at a reflection of the wall as well as an integrated shape. So be very careful there when you are making your initial marks. Be very careful to indicate to yourself in some way where the waterline lives. So what we can see here is a roofline, and then in the water, in the reflection, you'll see that roofline again. And we did reflections before, so remember that. So I'm going to put that up there, and I'll put that down there this time, just to remind myself. Now, with buildings and when you're sketching too, what I would be doing here right now is I'd be using this, my thumb, closing one eye, holding it up to an object, making a reference mark, and I'd be, because it's very easy to see when it's a photograph in front of you, just how big things need to be, but that's not easy at all when you're sitting there looking at reality. So I'd be going, there's a unit here, for example, from the end of that wall to the end of that house, that's 1 unit, okay? And then I would take that measure and project that over to here, and I'd say, so that's going to bring us to the beginning of this house. So this distance here is a little drop down, which brings us about roughly to the horizon, and then there's a building going up, and then we see that distance there is the beginning. So we've got the whole of this house to fit in there, and then there's a sort of a garage or something here, and before we start the next building on roughly that point. Now, what's happening here too is, which is greatly exaggerated in my drawing, is that perspective is really, so if I just draw in rough perspective lines here like this, hang on, where's the vanishing point? I would suggest the vanishing point is roughly where the sun is. So we've got lines coming to here. I mean, actually, we've got a really nice composition here, which really, and I don't deliberately choose, I don't cynically choose my compositions when I'm out sketching because they've got good perspective cues. But in this case, we've got this really nice channel coming in. We've got lots of boats all pointing in a certain direction. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to quickly sketch in a few items, very roughly, just literally just placeholder marks, which are going to help me to build. Whoops, that's not right. There we go. That's good. That's much too big, way too big. And it's interesting, when I did that there, I did it way too small. So these houses here, if you look here, this building is straight on, but here we can see that the roof line is, the angle of the roof line there has become visible, whereas on this end it isn't, and that's because we've started to have perspective diminishment. This is what those perspective lines kind of look like if they were real, and those, having that sort of mark making in your head, that can only be in your head, I'm afraid, when you're out sketching, will be really helpful for you to be able to put the right sort of shape of mark in at the right place. So we've got that. And then in here you can see this roof line is quite perspective-y, and it's starting to, perspective is starting to fall away. So we're starting to get a perspective diminishment in this direction, and this as well. So it's the other point, another point perspective there. So we'll run that building down there. Now we'll pick up on, this is so difficult to see because it is absolutely pitch black. I could see a lot more information when I was sitting there, which is interesting. So all I know for a fact is that this is a run of houses that cruise off down towards the town, and I will therefore put in, sorry, I'm just going to a side here, I'm just going to change what I'm talking about, because houses, when you're drawing houses, I always try to remember that houses are effectively this square block with verticals. So they have horizontals and verticals. If you remember that, then it's quite easy to find the right marks. So, for example, windows will tend to be stacked in most houses. You'll see this, and I'm guessing that's got something to do with building. So it can be really easy to put in a handful of marks when you're sketching, just to help you orientate your brush later on. I can't even see what on earth is going on there. I absolutely can't see it at all. I could see it when I was there at the time. I think there's a building coming out at us. I'm going to put a gable-ended building like that in there. With some, there's my vertical marks to indicate the, if you like, where the windows will go. And then on this building here, no, sorry, we've got this building here, that's got a little, oh, I see. Wow, yeah, I can see it better in this. I'm just going to show you something. This is almost impossible, this, isn't it? Because we can see such a tiny amount of detail here. Okay, there's a building coming towards us, and we can see the end of the roof line there. Let's not get hung up on too much detail here, because that would be very boring. So I'm just going to put in roughly where the windows go here on this building here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 drops of windows. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can then also run a horizontal along, and there we have very simply the exact whereabouts of those windows and how they're going to fit in, which is extremely useful. And over here we've got, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm sorry about this, chaps. I'm going to completely cheat. I'm going to diminish this. I'm going to make this the same building again with the limited information that we've got, and we will get a sense of this place. Let's say 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But behind that, there's some nice little trees coming up, which I will accentuate, make much bigger than they really are, because they're much nicer looking than houses. Right, so let's move from this house line, which is very boring, very dull, and come down to the sea line, and you've got the shadow in front. So, as I said before, there's the line of the sea is here, and of course that's going to be flat. So we're going to just, and you can't see it, but we're going to mark it in. And about here, there's a sea wall coming out again, which you can't see. I didn't realise how awful this would be. I can tell you for a fact there is the mill pond wall is coming out like this, about here. And I can see it in my drawing. I cannot see it in this photograph. So you're going to have to trust me on that. Let's just put that in. And what I've done is I've used my perspective diminishment leading towards, vanishing point leading towards roughly around here somewhere to make that come to life. There's a little boat just moored just off that, which I will put in. And you used to do a comedy child's boat there. That is doing that very well. Now let's just put in a few more bits of boat information. Remember with boats, actually this is quite useful in many ways. Whoops, oh, I didn't realise you couldn't see what I was doing there. I've been pointing at things and they weren't on the screen. Oh dear. I need a red pointer thing, a heads-up display. I will, you've obviously got this on the PDF, but try and find the original photograph too and put that onto WhatsApp later so that you can see much more detail. Now this, when you've got a terrible photograph like this, it's quite useful. So we know this is a boat, don't we? Our brains know it's a boat, but it doesn't look anything like a boat. So what we tend to do is we tend to draw boats like this. And quite often you're not going to be seeing that when it's there. So I always look for, if you like, key shapes on something as opposed to actual any kind of shape. And what we've got here is, this is a very interesting, quite challenging part of our drawing, because we've got a highlight here, which we're going to need to keep clear. But essentially, the shape we've got to deal with here is a big, dollopy, old kind of square. And of course, we're looking at not only the boat, but its reflection here. So all I'm going to do is put in this kind of a mark in the hope that when I remember to leave this bit unpainted, when we come to do the light or the painting a bit later on, let's just indicate down here, you can see this reflection in the water. And be very careful here to make sure that, again, I leave any bright areas. Now this is where the sun is, but I'm not going to put a big circle for the sun in. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And interestingly, the shoreline is quite a long way out there. Just much more up there, and bring that down to there, which means that that boat is now in the wrong place. But that's okay. That boat can be floating there. What we can see is we can see an open sort of deck on the boat. Very roughly. This. And that's around like that. And we've got, again, a large amount of reflection here. Very, very important to the atmosphere. How the picture looks. Okay, little speedboat, very sweet little speedboat there. And got a big engine on the back to prove that it's a speedboat. And it's got these lovely long shadows, which is something we did a couple of weeks ago. We looked at how shadows work. It's quite nice. And let's just put in a big shadow here as well. Now there's a couple more little holes down here that we need to put in. So I'm just going to finish off this so quick outline here, this boat. And we've got a couple of smaller round boats into very rough sketching until we get to this entrance. And let's just stop and take stock. Okay, that's good. I just want to put in this tree line really, and I think really good to start painting some. I'm not going to make a big deal of this foliage, so we get a rough idea of where things are. And I think that's probably enough information for us to start painting. Let's give this a go, shall we? So what's this? I'm just checking back on my drawing. I haven't quite got it fully. I need to be able to be quite certain where my main bits of information are. We're not bad there. We're okay. That ends there. That reflection comes down from the water. We've got this roof line here. this reflection in the water here, and then this reflection here. This house is quite big. Comes over to there. I can see how awful my drawing is already. I've completely missed where this boat actually lies. I don't think I mind. And there's a highlight there. So this reflection, of course, diminishes away with perspective in the same way that the perspective here diminishes away. So we get a patch of dry land. So that will do me as an outline drawing. So I can't believe I did that with just an ink pen. There we go. Okay, so actually, give us a thumbs up. Are you ready for me to launch into painting, or do you want to just finish it off? Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes to finish off your sketching.
Nick?
Yes, hi.
Can anybody else hear music in the background? Yeah.
That'll be my radio. Hang on, let's just
turn it off.
Is that better?
Yes, relief.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realise that would be picking up. It's barely audible here in the office.
Oh, right. Oh, that's better.
Mm.
Okay.
God, how annoying. Okay, so have a couple of minutes to finish it off. I'll just waffle while you're doing that. And I'll tell you why. Because what I would be confronted with now, if I was actually drawing this, would be my first, if you like, run at this is probably to try and so we've got all these shadows. When you've got something, this is very difficult. I'm trying to find the right point to start here. When you've got a very bright subject, when your picture is very bright, that usually means the painting is going to be very dark. That is completely counterintuitive, but of course, light values are relative. So effectively what we're talking about is contrast. You know, the greater the contrast, the brighter the scene. If you want to paint a misty day, it'll be painted very, very pale. You know, you wouldn't get a good sense of mist if it was anything other than ghostly thin washes. But when you've got a bright subject, strong light, and you see this, if you ever go painting in, you know, France, you know, south of France or Spain, the shadows are so powerful, and that's what gives it its sense of light. And that's what we've got working here. So my first marks here are going to be very different to how we would normally do things. I will be going in to try and get a sense of drawing up the shadow tones. So the shadow tones we've got working, and you would definitely see this if you were sitting there. When you've got light punching through your eyes, you're going to be seeing into the shadows only. So everything you see is shadow, everything. So my first mark is going to be to get the right depth of tone into these shadow areas as a completely flat, consistent thing. And so what I'm going to be trying to do, which is possibly a bit challenging, but it's also very doable if you run with it. So where we've got shadow here, I'm going to try and almost draw, and that's not the right word. I think probably the best way to think of this is I'm doing, if you like, the middle layer first, what would normally be the middle layer. So what I want to get is I want to use my brush, you know, to make a nice watercolour, we've got to have nice edges, haven't we, in the watercolour, like this. I always look at these things, my practice sheet. If you get this kind of line in your watercolour painting, combined with things like, you know, soft marks and blends, And, you know, these edges really speak volumes in terms of, you know, if you like, viewer enjoyment. You know, stuff like this is gold dust, really, in a painting. So our job as an artist here is to get the paint to be unfussed as possible. And the best way to get that with shadows is to see everything, all of this stuff, as one layer running all the way down. And the problem with that is that we've got to be very careful to not paint anywhere where there's light. So if I'm going to zoom in, this is my technical zoom camera. Oops, wobbles. Just hit the stand there. Stop wobbling. Stop wobbling. There we go. You can see in there, there's a couple of windows. We've got this burnout on the actual object, which I didn't record here, interestingly. Not in the same way. But it is quite nice to be able to record burnout. I have got other sketches where I've actually tried to look at the sun. Usually, actually, well, there you go, I'm sitting in my back garden, so I'm just saying it can be done. And draw my roof line, looking because the sun sets behind my house, and try to paint the roof line, and then you end up painting this kind of pink colour, where the dark object is burnt. You know, your eyes are burnt out by the sunshine. So anyway, if we can paint this whole run of grey of black stuff, which isn't black, of course, it's blues and purples, we will get the right sense of mark making on our painting that we should be able to make a good sense of space here. So, like I said, I'm not going to get us to paint a lovely white circular sun. And in fact, we're going to worry about the sky later, on account of the fact that this shadow tone is quite important. Incidentally, I forgot to say something quite important. When you're here doing this sketching, this sun is moving at quite a rate and setting, and you sense that. You go, oh, I've got to get this quickly before it sets. And so what you tend to do is tend to try and do a snapshot. So again, that's in sketching, in terms of sketching, flat sketching technique, that's kind of a lot about what we're doing here too, is we want to run round and get all the shadows in the right place, because those shadows will change quite dramatically over the period of 1 hour, which might be how long it takes to sit there and do this. This sun will have moved from here to behind these houses, and then all of your shadows will have gone. So you want to get in there quick and record the shadows as best you can. Okay, right, can I just have a quick general thumbs up? Everybody happy for me to launch into painting? Yeah, we good? Excellent. Right, now, precise colour I don't think matters too much here. This isn't a precise kind of, you know, sketching isn't precise. Sketching is fun, immediate, dynamic, and that stuff. So I'm going to, boringly, pick my favourite colours, which is what I always do. And I really, really like crimson, and how that interacts with blue. But I'm going to make up this fairly strong pile of crimson colour stuff. There was some random colour left in this palette where I'm painting, which I think won't do any harm at all. This is alizarin crimson I'm picking up here. I've also got a thing called Crimson Lake, which is a slightly brighter, more pinky colour, but this is like red wine. It's probably why I like it. It's a really subtle, dark tone, and this is very nice. I can see that I've used it here. It's really great for shadows because it's warm. But what I've got to do is I've got to add something to this to make it more neutral. So I'm going to leave that brush loaded with the magenta and get another brush to pick up on some blue. And I'm not sure which of the blues to use. I think probably I'm going to use this Prussian blue, which is actually has a tendency to go much darker than the ultramarine. The ultramarine is it's quite a bright blue, really. So there's my colours there. Can you see that? You can see the sort of pigment that's involved in that. So this is a lot of pigment. It's quite dark. Don't want anything too wishy-washy here. I've now got 2 brushes. That might be too complicated. Yeah, let's not do 2 brush work. Let's do 1 brush work, because actually, when you're sketching, you're not going to be using 2 brushes. So I'm just going to use the 1 brush, and it's by no means a delicate object. This is quite big, quite a big flat brush, and I'm just going to combine those 2 colours in fairly consistently, so working together quite well. That'll do nicely. I've basically made a sort of warm Payne's grey there. There's one called Davies grey, I think. It's probably a bit like that. But it's more complex than that because it's made of component colours. It's slightly more interesting to look at than just Payne's grey out the packet. Okay, now where shall I start? I would most likely start on something like this, on the point of interest, and that's all this centre area here with the little boat. So I'm going to be very careful here. So let's just test my colour. I'm going to test it in the shadow of this boat. That seems like the right thing to do, doesn't it? But that's quite neutral. I was hoping it might be a bit more interesting than that. There's another brush. That's just some water. I'm going to make that look watercolour-y. If I'm doing this, I better finish it off. We've got this. I'm just going to. I'm distracting myself here, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. I'm avoiding the real issue here. It's quite hard for us to do. But I'm good with that tone. That sounds good. That's answered my question. Let's get into this. So here through to here, and all I'm going to do now, I'm going to be doing this if I was sitting there looking at it, is just put in the dark bit where I see dark and light where I see light, and not worry too much about precision. There's too much pigment on that. It's gone too dark. Okay, so there's not very much feature here in this building. It looks a bit like Tracy Island, like Thunderbird 3 is going to come popping out any minute now. Now I'm going to make sure I continue my tone down into the water. Yeah. And I'm going to be very careful to mimic I've got this roof line here. So I'm using the flat edge of the brush to give me these horizontal marks, to leave some marks free, some areas free. And that's one of the great advantages of these flat brushes, isn't it? You give you that opportunity to do that. Making sure that when I made a mark here, I replicate that mark in the reflection in exactly the right place. Otherwise, it won't look like a reflection, it will look like an object. And there's that boat in there too, which I wouldn't worry about. So moving along, this is now a solid wall of tone. And we're going to go to this building here, which is slightly challenging because there's a couple of moments where light is coming through windows, it would appear. And there's another interesting challenge here too, which is that this is where the sunset is. So I'm going to come in here in a second and just wash some of that stuff out. Now, if we come down into the reflection here, we're going to have a curious phenomenon, which is shadow and reflection combined, followed by shadow and sorry, reflection and no shadow. And I'm going to continue into that boat. There's a lot going on here. I'm watching out for the reflections are a bit broken. And I'm going to be very careful here that wheelhouse. I leave that wheelhouse highlighted. Now, while this is still damp, I've got to get in here. There's the roof line. And do a trick, which is very simple. Get some water. Oh, that was the red. That wasn't mine. Where's my water brush gone? Put it in the wrong place. I'm just going to pour in some water up there and let that wash down. It's going to just rinse out some of the pigment. Lift some of that out actually. The dry. I'll just took some of the water out of the brush. There we go. So that's kind of washed out a bit. And that's, you can see the mark it makes. It's like this. It's quite a nice mark. That's right. So we've got that window. Where was I? Let's just continue now with this boat thing. So we've got. So I was doing that wheelhouse. So let's just continue that. Oh, I've got to change my colour. Picked up the wrong pigment. Wow. Put it back. Doesn't matter. It's going to be more fun. Right. So shadow coming around there. Around there. In fact, there's very little highlight in there. It's all actually remaining solid. But this boat has got highlight areas on it. So be very careful to hold on to. And I'm going up to the building next door now, as you can probably see. And the roof line of stuff here. So I think this is okay. Let's just complete that off, and that's got this reflection of this boat that's coming down here into the water. And now I'm just going to paint around the edge of the boat so that all we're left with is just a few highlights. Now, there's more scope, there's more room for detail later on, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. So now let's just run this shadow all along here. Whoops, there's a big mistake there. It looks like there's a big flagpole coming out the side of that house. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to paint, I'm going to painting by numbers here. I'm going to fill in those lines I made earlier on with some pigment. Get this all done while all the paint's wet, it all nicely flows together and we don't see the lines. That's right, we don't balance, we don't see. We've taken a lot of we don't see that we've done it mechanically, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It looks quite natural. So I'm just fashion this roof edge. Okay. Moving along. This is where I cheated and put in an extra house, which isn't there because my composition rubbish. So I'm just going to repeat that whole thing. Now, interestingly, I've just dipped my brush into a bit more blue. So my pigment has changed slightly. I think that's probably okay. I don't think that matters too much. In fact, it looks to me like that's pretty much what the what the light has done anyway. Just going to quickly. So what I'm trying to do here, just to reiterate, is get a nice crispy edge to some of these bulk areas, so they look like buildings. So buildings are hard-edged things, you know, big square chunks of building materials. So we get that feeling by. I'm just going to finish that with that sort of random mark. By making big square marks, basically. Oh, much more blue. See, I'm picking up on the red there, so we're going very, very blue here for my trees, which is interesting. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Definitely it's bad, actually. Some more trees just here. And of course, because everything's in silhouette, it's all joined together. I'm not going to see any difference. And then behind us boat here, so there is a wall there, which I'm going to now change to a slightly, I'm just going to water that down a bit so it's paler. That's all I'm doing. And I'm going to put in this wall and make sure that that wall is, I'm going to basically cut this boat out of the dark pigment of this wall. And when I drew this, in reality, what I did is I found lots and lots of references to greens in there. So I think I might just drop them in actually, because I've got some green in my palette made up. I'm just going to add into this base, into this shadow pigment, a hint of green to help me. Well, and that's because that's what I recorded when I was doing this sketch. I think it seems like the right thing to do. Let's just continue that along there. And of course, we've got all this weed on the surface. That is green as well, interestingly. So, hang on, I haven't got the shadows. One thing at a time, Shadows. So we've got the shadows here and here. We've got shadows in the trees here. Let's pick up on the shadows in the trees. That's not overworked trees, just make them nice and brushy. Nice little evergreens going there over the water. I'll come back a bit later on. And so this is the shadow tones we're looking at, the stuff that is that has got the light buff in front of it, so shielding us from this information. We will come back and put in some pale greens later on. So that's all lovely. We've got the shadow on this boat here. Let's just put in a couple of shadows. Same tone, again, same pigment as before. Just literally putting in the shadows that are there with these objects. This little speedboat here, which is much further forward in my composition here than it is in the photograph. Interesting, yeah. But I think the principle applies. This actual shadow, by the way, I've got that in the wrong place. Can you see that? This shadow is supposed to be coming more towards me. Just make it a pointy front like that. It's got this little motor back. And just see the end of that stern coming out. I'm missing something here. No, we've just got a big and large gap, that's all. That's fine. We are missing this. This is interesting just here. Can you see what I'm pointing at? I think so. So the shadow, the reflection of this building here is this mark here that I made earlier on, but it's partly in shadow, it's cast by this house, and partly lit by the setting sun. And where it's lit, is picking up the green pigment of the weed that's floating on the surface. very interesting indeed. So I'm going to just quickly, so I'm using that same pigment. I'm going to quickly sketch some of that in, like this. And then let's make sure that we're lined up. We are, good. And actually there's a boat there, but I've done my drawing better, so there isn't a boat there. So that's okay. I'm just going to find around that. Let's just pop that in there. And of course this boat, while we're here, this boat's in shadow as well. Pick up on that. Just leaving that one to highlight. And there's a couple of marks where there's a gaps in the weed. Now I'm going to get some green into this area here. And it's quite a bright colour because it's well highlit. So I'm just going to see what happens. And, you know, I'm experimenting here. I'm just going to drop that in on top. And what's going to happen? It might be too dark, actually. It is. It's a bit dark because that's a highlight. It's fairly bright, so I'm just going to dab out a little bit of the pigment just here, just to, if you like, make a highlight just there. I don't want to dab it all out. I'm being ever so delicate here. I do want that green in there, but I want some of it to be not there. That makes sense. So I'm just taking some of that out. Can you see what it's looking like? Yeah, sort of. Let's just dab that out just there. There we go. So that's a very bright green, a very high tone, very light colour. We've got there. Okay, so what have we got here? So we've got that shadow in there, got that shadow in there. That's a bit of a mess. We might have to come and fix that in there. I've lost the depth of the shadow in there. I'm going to have to wait till it dries before I come back to it. Let's just put in this. We're back on the shadows. Let's just pop in here. This is all in shadow, this boat. It's a completely shady boat. But like all boats, got a pointy bit at the front. And then underneath the hull, some interesting bit of light underneath the hull. Actually, with some reds in it. And the shadow here is now running away from us. Fascinatingly, I'm just going to pop some reds into this shadow area here. And some yellows, in fact. Because what we've got the sun just catching on the bow and then being reflected in the water. Fascinating confusion of light there. That'd be quite nice to look at, I think, when it's finished. Haven't even looked at the shore, have we? So when I did my sketch, it would appear that I just painted that all in a kind of shadow tone. Interesting. So, but I don't think we'll do that, which is odd. So bear with me saying we're going to faithfully copy sketch, but I'm gonna go for a greyish, sorry, a warm grey here, which I'm making up some. This is with some vermilion, that colour, and I'm just going to. Sorry, I'm jumping around. Look, I've finished the kind of shadow tones in the main. So now I'm just going for some bigger areas. Now I could really do with a much bigger brush than that, couldn't I? So if we go with this brush, just a big flat brush. Sometimes when I'm sketching, I only have one brush with me. And I think actually the truth is you will always work with what you've got, as opposed to worrying too much about getting. You're not going to get too much from the equipment stress, I don't think. So be very careful when I do this that I don't cover up any highlight areas, This needs to be quick and rough. Give it that sleight of hand feeling. There's a bit of texture in there. And we can happily run over the shadows, but don't run over the solid objects. That'll do for that. Just here, we've got a lot of brightness, and I'm going to cheat here. And I'm going to drop in some. So this is roughly where the centre of brightness is here. I'm just going to pump in some pale yellow pigment and a lot of water to make that all rinse out, to make it all, it's kind of a highlight feeling. That's deliberately going to break up that wash and, you know, damage it if you like, make it look interesting. Okay, so taking stock, what have we got to do? Got to repair that shadow, but I'll worry about that later. I've got to just finish off here. It's not dark enough. No, we'll worry about that later. Let's wander out here into the. I know. I've got a better idea. Okay, take a deep breath. I'm going to let that dry. In fact, I'm going to force dry that because I think it's time to put the sky pigments in. Because of course the sky and the bit of water there, they're the same. Means we're done at the same time. So a quick dry off. Not that this is wringing wet because we've been using very small strokes. Okay. If you're going to do a big wet wash and you've got stuff on the paper, you do want to have that bone dry. Bit of a challenge if you're out in the woods doing paintings to get this. Somebody pointed out to me that my sketching style is different to my studio painting style, and that was just this week. Somebody came in the studio and said, "I love what you've been putting up on Instagram. It looks quite different in style. It's like you've left little gaps." And I thought about it, and she's right. One has to, one is forced to, avoid overlap sometimes, which you don't have to do if you pasted to a board in a nice clean environment with a hairdryer on hand. You don't need to worry about that so much. So this is not therefore going to look like one of my sketches. It's going to look like a studio painting, but it's quite interesting how that dynamic changes when you're actually out there. So what I want to do here is it's the sky, so it's big and loose. I really want to somehow get that that intense light. Now, have I got this sketchbook here? No, I don't have sketchbooks here. Which is a shame because I would like right now to show you that actual sketch a bit closer up. No, I don't think here. Okay, sky and water, one pigment. The challenge being this bright area that burns your eyes. You know, it's really important to keep that. So, I mean, this is one of those things that it's much easier to do in a sort of dry, static kind of environment than it is to do when you're out there. But you know, that's okay. Let's do this. What I'm going to do. Hang on, I'm going to change my water. That's what I'm going to do. You don't want grey water when you're about to have a nice clean sun. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just soak the page around this area here, which is where this big bright light is, and include the shadow, where that's reflected in the water. So that's all damp on there, and there's a bit of actually here too. Whoops, I'm picking up some pigment, some pencil in my water. That happens. And I want to get that quite, oh, that's going to pour down, that water's going to pour down across my painting now. Make it super saturated light. So I'm just going to dampen all along this horizon and into the buildings that I've created. And now I should be able to just paint nice clean blue pigment all the way up to that soft edge. And not worry too much about it. That's the theory. So let's see what happens. That's quite a big area to fill. I'm working on a quarter sheet, which is kind of like a chunk out of A3 really. So 2 sheetish with the pigment that I've got. Let's just have a quick test. And I don't want to make this so dark that, actually it does want to be quite dark. So, like I said before, the reason things look bright is when they're dark. So I think that'll do. Let's give it a go. Be very quick here and just come down and touch into that wet area, if I can do that. Paint over everything I've done so far. Whoops, my brush has become a hairy monster. I'm going to hang around here. It's a bit too much pigment there. So I'm going to lift out with the same brush, not lift out as such, but this is just, I've just rinsed it off, so I can just connect that now with just water. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Be very careful not to touch this too much. And then we've got a lot of blue pigment in this water. That's a reflection of the sky, of course. And running out to see it's a bit paler there. So I'm just going to put that in like that. And you can, if you want to, you can run across your buildings because it's all shadow, it's all red. Oh, I just painted into my boat with a highlight on. I didn't want to do that. Did not want to do that. Always and try and stop as soon as I can. Just leave it actually. I'm just going to dry that off. Actually, what I might do, so here we are, I'm just now reinventing the wheel as we go on the hoof. I'm going to put in some pale yellow into that a bit here and there. I'm probably going to damage the wash when I do this. So be very careful here. This is just a hint of yellow here and here, here. And I'm also going to put a bit of orange in. Just, I mean, literally touching a bit of orange in here and there, and not really painting that into the painting, as it were. I'm subtly tinting. It's ever so subtle. Oh, that's not subtle, that's huge. We've got a big sunset over this side. How interesting, that's going to be gorgeous. How are we doing here? Doesn't look very sunny, does it? I'm just going to pull out. Oh, look at that. I'm just lifting out here. A couple of places, that's really quite helpful. That. Just lift it out from that central area. That'll do. It's got a bit green. I think that's a problem. Yeah, that's all right. Okay, I'm going to pick up on this sort of yellowish orangey colour that we've got, because it's on the brush, really. Simple as that. I can see this in a few places. I can see it on that speedboat there. I can see it in the front of this boat. And in the reflections here. So, just because it's here, just because we're working on that at the moment, I'm just going to plop it in one or two little places. Very, very subtle. Around the back of that boat, interestingly, some orange that reflects in the water. And we got that, didn't we? And there's something interesting that happens when you pick up on using the same colours here and there. It sort of tends to make the painting feel like it's integrated. So what have we got to do now? I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave that to settle. That's still wet, it's still very buckly. So I'm going to dry that off. And I think the only thing, I mean, now we're going to dance around this and just have a look at and put in some bits of detail here and there just to strengthen the whole composition. We've got to put in some more pigment here, probably on the beach. And then just pick up on some detail. So for example, we want to just get a little bit darker in the deepest parts of the thing, and we want to put some feature onto these little boats, like masts and poles in the channel here. So little things really. Okay, how are we all doing? Everybody good? Anybody got any comments? Please feel free to unmute and shout abuse. Excellent. Okay. So I think now, what I'm going to try and do, it's very rough, this painting, but it's quite charming. I think, and hopefully yours is the same. So I don't want to break that, but I do think it needs a bit of detail here and there. So I'm going to go in with a rigger and try and do the minimum amount of stuff I need to do to make it, just to make it really make sense, so we can see what's going on. And it really isn't much. I'm constantly surprised when I look back at sketches and stuff, when I've done a quick sketch and it's been a flippant thing. I remember going to France when I was much younger and I was still wrestling a bit with this medium. I wasn't really comfortable with pigments and strength, and I did these sketches of some buildings. I didn't like them at the time, but I've kept them, so I'm a bit obsessive about that. And I can look back at them now and I can see a whole load more information in there than I thought was there at the time. And I think our inner voice tends to tell us that what we've done is crap. And I think that's normal. And I wouldn't worry about that too much. I wouldn't. It's easy to say that. I would try and shout down those voices and rather give yourself the credit for actually, this is a simple rule. If you can just keep, if you like, the pigment sweet, then you've done a good painting. Regardless, and of course, your voice will be telling you, "It isn't anything like a boat." It'll tell you that. And what you've got to say to back is, "I don't care. It's a nice piece of watercolor. It's a nice watercolor shape." Now, my inner voice is telling me that these windows are too bright, so I'm going to get a big splosh of blue and completely cover this entire area to reduce that, if you like, second tone, as it were, down to shadow. Okay, that's that, and that's going to continue down onto this boat and into this shadow. I felt I had to do that because it just wasn't really ringing true for me. So that shadow comes across there, and I hope that's going to fix my inner voice telling me I'm crap. That's okay. It's not great. It's okay. Ooh, in there as well. Okay. Very nice. But that wasn't what I was going to do right now. So what I'm going to do right now is pick up on the rigger and using pretty much the same pigment tone. Let me just have a quick scribble here. Yeah, so that's just that same pigment we were using here earlier on, but now it's in a skinny brush. So I've got to go into this channel here, and I've got to put that horizon in. So this is lovely and bone dry. It's got to be bone dry, otherwise you'll blur things. So I just want to make this, that horizon is so important in terms of orienting the viewer's brain. So what I'm doing is going to do it quite carefully. Put a really straight line there. And what I can see if I look at this, is I can see that there is feature in the distance, like trees or buildings or something. And there is also these, which every Emsworthian knows. Hang on a second. Bring it down a bit further. It's a bit far north. These two mooring posts here from the old days of shipbuilding, sticking out in the harbour. They're quite a feature. They're way too big, by the way, and they're way over my head height, because there's my head height. It's horizon. Not that big. So every Emsworthian is going to go, those posts aren't that big. The artist isn't very good. And then also, I missed earlier on, but there's actually a little sort of rock feature, it's a bone, very roughly. And Then, because of the nature of lights, these, actually I'm just going to, this wall is annoying me. I'm going to have to colour this wall somehow. So that's the end, and we've got the end in there. I don't know what to do. I know what to do. Let's just make, one of the things I always want to see is when I'm near water, a nautical scene, some masts, and a few of these sticking up from behind the wall here. This is ever such a skinny mark, tiny, tiny mark. There's also a tree growing on that plot, which I'll just, and that's in shadow, so I'll just sketch that in. I should really put that into the main shadow, and I didn't, so my fault entirely. And there might be an area of something like this. And so it's building Tracy Island. It's got some windows going on like this in the shadow areas. So I'm literally putting a thin overlay. That's what I'm doing there, so that's fine. Again, not overworking it too much, just adding a bit of depth in there to give it a bit of feature. That's fine. There is a little boat in there. There it is. But I'm not going to touch that. I'm going to leave that, if you like, leave it to the imagination. Some few marks in the channel there. There is this headland is quite dark though. Let's just make up a bit more pigment in that greyish colour. I'm just going to reinforce this channel entrance quite a lot more than actually is fully necessary. I just want to close off that entrance, if you like, in visual terms. Now, so what I'm doing is I'm putting that mark in dark pigment. And now I'm going to blend that in to the beach. Make sure I don't have that edge showing. No edge, please. And that's just to make our eye come out of the entrance there. It's not dark enough. I mean, that's dark enough, sorry. These bits are now not dark enough. So I'll make that too dark. I mean, a bit stronger. There we go, it's better. Feel more coherent. This building here, this is the one that's all burnt out. I don't need to try very hard. I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to leave all of those because they're fine. I want to just get this to be a little more obvious about what it is. And weirdly, my eyes scanning it, I can't see anything that is actually going to make that happen. So I think I'll just put in, if you like, a transom, or the back of the boat here, and have that reflected in the water, and pick up the back of the cabin. So this is just going to be a tiny amount darker than the rest, and actually the posts, if you like, the windows of the cabin. Yeah, and then that comes around there. I think that'll do me. Really, it's quite important to not overwork these things. That's sticking out quite nicely, isn't it? This is still a complete chaos here. I can't see what I've done here at all. I'd rather open that and disappear. Let's just bring this little boat. I'm just going to give this boat here a bit of more of a presence. By darkening exactly the same strokes. So, no, I'm not going to do that. That's worked well. That isn't going to work. I'm just going to get rid of that. So I'm just rubbing that out with my finger while it's still wet. This needs a slightly different treatment, and it needs to be it needs to be cut out of its background somehow. I'm not sure I understand how I'm going to do that. You say that. Oh, I'll do the same as before. I'm going to pick up the back of the boat. As best as I can imagine. Make sure that's reflected. And then just indicate where that hull meets the water. And then, of course, it's got a cabin. And I'm going to cheat here. It's not visible, it's not obvious, but I think this boat should have a mast. So I'm just going to stick one onto that boat because it looks a bit silly without it. So that's now a sailing boat. I do hope that the owner doesn't get cross with me. Oh, there's a little feature on the side there just to make it more like a boat. That'll do. That's mysterious. I don't know. This shape here in the middle of the space, I'm confused by that. I've confused myself. Interesting. So my brother, Simon, who's a brilliant watercolourist, actually uses a rubber sometimes, which I've never done. But I'm thinking, looking at this and going, let's have the rubber on that when no one's looking later on. I think you can do a small amount of correction. I'm going to come over here now, back to this side, because I just want to make these trees. And this is just a green pigment I've got here from earlier on. I'm just going to cover over very roughly, not the wall though. So that's just these trees. And you can see we've got this additive process going on where we're adding to the shadows. That's nice. I'm going to let that dry and I'm going to just beige in that wall in a minute. Bit more depth here, and here, these three boats in the foreground. So I'm going to pick up on, I'm going to grab some of the Prussian blue. That'll do fine. I'll just put a layer on. I'm just going, the idea here is just to increase the depth of the shadows. Actually that's interesting here. I don't want to lose this lovely wishy-washiness that I've got going on here. I think I'll pick up, no, I'm going to leave a lot of that in. Right, I'm talking to myself, as you can hear. Let's try this one first. So I want to just make that appear more like a shadow. So we've got all this strong light. So it's really in the center of the shadow area. I just want to drop that tone down a bit. So I'm trying to make a nice strong shape. Like that. Bring that into the shadow as well. That's all right. And I'm going to go inside the boat as well. Just in the open bit. That'll do fine. And then here, on this speedboat, just at the front. That's the only place I want to make that stronger. Actually, I could bring that shadow and that into the shadow as well. And here, I just want to, oops, I've just got to increase the definition of the shape. So I'm going to put in a gunnel here, which I can see, and a transom. So a bit more feature, because this is close by, so you get a bit more detail. And then I'm going to increase the shadow underneath. I don't want to lose that nice blend work going on there, so I'm overpaint that. That's okay. A bit more shadow at the front there. A few more bits of detail, not much though. Actually, I just did some detail on that. I don't know what. One little thing here, tiny thing. Just going to make this on the screen more obvious. So there it is. Very careful not to actually draw, because that always looks a bit nasty. Got a little feature on the front of that thing. Around that. Can't really see what's going on there, it's too dark. Are we there? Are we there yet? Bring that a bit further out, that reflection. Funny thing about it the last minute. That's ridiculously annoying reflection there. Feels like it shouldn't be there. Okay, well, oh, hang on. I've got a big piece of white where I shouldn't have a piece of white. And I want some orangey beige. Just in this wall here. And quickly sketch that in like that. And we bring that pigment into the beige as well. A little bit of feature in those trees, just a scratch or scribble. Okay, I'm going to walk away. Actually, there's one thing I'm going to do. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. I shouldn't be fiddling like this. There's just this section here. It's not quite glowing, and I'm going to risk ruining my painting in front of your very eyes, because I just think it needs a shade more orange. I'm just going to paint orange into everything. It's all, there we go. That's it. That's what I want to do. It makes it look a bit more like this bright light behind it. Okay. That's good. Marvellous. Right, okay, so who wants to unmute and tell me about their work? How much did you enjoy that? Was it brilliant, or was it a complete, indecipherable, chaotic, crazy mess? Right, so Ta-da. Back in the room.
Yeah.
Hello, hello.
I think there's enough of your statements and indecipherable mess.
I found it very proud.
I missed that, whoever that was. That was very.
Yeah.
Oh,